Welcome to We Married the Family podcast series, where I explore the realities of life with in-laws. I'm Dr. Nadia, a counselling psychologist and founder of We Married the Family, an international support group and coaching program for daughters-in-law. Today's episode is inspired by one of my clients' therapy sessions. I've been working with her for a few weeks around in-law issues. Everything in session is confidential, so I'm not going into any of the material. But I have the go-ahead to share this gem that came out in our work. It's inspired from my client's own words and led to something very thought-provoking. It's about the things women tolerate and how to reframe your decision-making around relationships in which you feel overlooked, undervalued, dismissed, and disrespected. And it's about being aware of what you will and won't tolerate. We've all heard the phrase about taking your seat at the table. There's different variations of it, like the quote from Shirley Anita St. Hill Chisholm, the first African-American woman to be elected into US Congress in 1968, who said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." Or the words of Ayanna Soini Presley, US Representative for Massachusetts, who said, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, don't just pull up a chair, build a new table." Or by the legendary singer, songwriter, and activist Nina Simone, who said, "You've got to learn to leave the table when love is no longer being served." It's no coincidence that all these women are of African American heritage. They have been in many important places as pioneers and would have sat at many tables where people didn't look like them or share their history. At tables where their worth, their value might have been questioned, where people would have doubted them, possibly dismissed them, not given them value, and not seen their worth. The table we're discussing today is not necessarily about race or politics, but about other differences around heritage, caste, culture, and gender. It's the table where you, your partner, and his family are seated. Before we go any further, I'd like to invite you to complete a little exercise for yourself. Take a moment to grab a piece of paper and a pen. I want you to draw what this table and seating arrangement looks like for you personally as a married woman. Draw the table in whatever shape you want and the chairs around it, and write who is sitting where. Once you've drawn this, thinking of your current table, what do you like or dislike about it? Do you like that there are more people than what you grew up with, giving you a sense of family and togetherness? Or does that feel crowded? Do you like that your partner is next to you? Or are you actually alone? Once you've done this, I'd like you to draw another table with a different arrangement to show you how you would ideally like it to be. Do you need more chairs or more space between the chairs? Do you want a separate table? And who would be seated there? This will give you a visual on your current dynamic and what changes you'd like. In the session with my client, we started to explore what it means to stay seated at a table and when is it okay to leave. It gets complicated when you're not being treated well, when you've been taught to tolerate disrespect, to keep feeding others even when no one is putting food on your plate, or even still, when you're criticized for plating up for yourself. This includes both external criticism and internal criticism. The voice that says, "Don't be so selfish to feed yourself," when your mother-in-law is right next to you. Or, "Don't be so rude, you need to make sure your husband has what he needs first." And instead of food that's nourishing, you've got a plate full of cold leftovers. The family expectations get mixed with your own cultural conditioning, where you've been taught to be selfless, and others believe you should only serve them and not yourself. Instead of being fed, you're now being starved. Maybe your husband pours you something to drink, and that keeps you going. Maybe your mum joins the table on a short visit, and that feels comforting. Or your father-in-law, after he's finished his meal, sees from across the table that your plate is still empty. "Give the girl some rice," he says, and you feel considered. You're not so starved. Now you're surviving. But you're not enjoying sitting here with this family. People are talking to each other, and no one wants to hear from you. When your husband turns to you, his sister pulls his arm. "Mum needs you to pass the salt," she orders. For some daughters-in-law, it's unbearable. Worse things happen at their table. For others, it's great, full of laughter and fun. And for most, it's all the things in between. You can ask yourself, is this table for you? What is missing? What do you need? What do you need to see from yourself to make your experience better? What could you bring to the table? What isn't healthy and needs to change? And who can help make those changes? Change can be chaotic and uncomfortable, but the atmosphere eventually settles. It's like the change between starters and main course and dessert. There's a kerfuffle and a rush, maybe some periods of silence and uncertainty, people looking around to see what's coming next. Maybe someone drops something or spills something, or their sleeve dips into the yogurt as they're passing the bottle of fizz across. It can be messy. There's a whole host, pun intended, of things that can be considered. If you don't like the conversation, can you bring up another topic? How can you get yourself heard? You might not need to leave the table. You might instead need to learn to bring your authenticity. If you don't like the way things are done and you can see the unhelpful patterns and the way your marriage and yourself is being hurt through them, maybe you can use your presence at this table to create change. There might be reasons why you are seated at this table. If it's too crowded and people are eating from each other's plates, could the chairs be spaced out a bit more? On a side note, couples eating from the same plate is a prophetic and cultural tradition that is really beautiful, and more couples need to keep this tradition alive. But if the parents are eating from the children's plate, or multiple people eating from one person's plate, we have an issue of boundaries here. If it's feeling overwhelming, do you need to pull your chair out a bit or excuse yourself for a while? There are a lot of ways to make it easier and more comfortable to stay at the table, if it's good for you and if it's worth it. This brings up the question of how much difficulty is okay to tolerate. Now, one of the things that's occurring at the moment in the therapy world and in the self-healing world is that people are very quick to dismiss things that are too difficult, rather than seeing the ways that these difficulties can shape them and propel them forward. They try and eradicate the difficulty completely by taking themselves out of the situation. And there might be some places where that is necessary. But a lot of the time, going through some difficulty is what creates our character. And on the other side, many women have been taught or told to tolerate way beyond their capacity, so they don't cause trouble to the family. But then it starts to negatively impact her, like when the woman at the table who's serving others but is starving herself. If you dislike something, a person's behavior, for example, or a trait they have, you can tolerate it for short periods. But if someone is harmful, for example, they're shouting at you every other day, you might still tolerate it, but it's going to cost you. There are some things that should never be tolerated. This brings me to your own self-worth. Many women either don't have great levels of self-worth before marriage, or their sense of worth decreases after marriage. If this happens, you might tolerate more than you should. Think about the issue you're dealing with and ask yourself, if my friend was going through this, what would I say to her? Would I tell her to wait it out, to do something different, or to get out of there? And compare this to what you tell yourself. Is it the same, or do you tell yourself something different? Your choice is what's important here. You might make many adjustments and changes and things keep going really well. You might make adjustments and changes and things are rocky for a while. You might make changes and see that nothing is actually changing, and then decide to leave. Your parents might tell you to go back. The table you were seated at before no longer has space. Or they might worry about what others in the restaurant will think, noticing that their daughter has gotten up so quickly, or that she's left and gone back to sit with her parents. This is something that you even might worry about, because we know how much stigma there is around divorce still. You might feel like you failed because you couldn't tolerate more. Or you might feel proud that you took a stand for yourself and saved yourself years of pain. It's true that there will always be something we don't particularly like, whichever table we find ourselves at or choose to be at. But how you manage with that will depend on what it is. Is it about making some rearrangements, moving chairs around, someone else serving the food or serving it alongside you? The changes that you need and want can take some time, and you might or might not want to wait. Sometimes the changes are just not possible. They might be too risky, or you realize this table isn't for you anymore. Maybe staying seated for the sake of your partner isn't enough to silence the struggles that you're facing every day. Whatever the reason, it's your decision to leave. And that will come with its own challenges. It's often painful, whether it's a mutual agreement or not. These tables are full of complexity, and only you can decide what's okay for you and when it's time to change the arrangement, the menu, the conversation, and when it's time to get up from your seat. If you'd like support with any of your in-law issues, you can join my daughter-in-law's membership. The link is in the description, or work one-to-one with myself or another therapist.